I mean, I don't want to speak for all archivists, but most archivists that I speak to want to do more, but we can't because of oversight from administration or financial restraints.
From the Society of American Archivists, student chapter at the University of Alabama, this is Archives and Communities, a podcast highlighting community archiving initiatives and the people behind them.
I'm Sandy Yang, a student in the Archival Studies Social Justice Master's Scholarship Program at the University of Alabama's School of Library and Information Studies. Today's guest is Angela Hauser. She goes by Angie, and she is a digital archivist and manager of special collections and archives at the UT Southwestern Medical Center. Today's topic is budget-friendly strategies for community archives. And just a little quick background, Angie Hauser is currently the digital archivist and manager of the special collections, library, and archives at the University of Texas Southwestern Medical Center. She received a Bachelor's of Arts in International Studies and Spanish Language from Wittenberg University in Springfield, Ohio, and her Master's in Library and Information Studies from the University of Alabama. In her career, she has worked in public government and academic archives across the country. With multifaceted expertise across sectors, Angie stands ready to share how collaborating solutions can uplift preservation against the odds by resourcefully maximizing existing skills and strengths across communities. At the intersection of public service and fiscal oversight, Angela, you've managed major digitization initiatives, expanding access to history within community means. What key mindsets make such projects thrive despite limited resources?
That's a good question, Sandy. So I think one of the mindsets that you have to have is just being flexible. And I know a lot of people don't think of that as a mindset, but it really is. You can't be too set in your ways and how you have to have this done, because sometimes you might overlook something that you can actually afford if you are looking at, oh, it has to be done this specific way or with this specific piece of equipment. You might overlook something that's half the cost. So being flexible, but also, kind of thinking out of the box. How will this initiative work not just for the public sector, but how will it work for your institution? Now, when you work for an institution that works with the public, you obviously have to work on both levels all the time. That can be exhausting, but you need to realize that all universities, government institutions, they are all there to, at the end of the day, make a profit in some shape or form, whether that's, the money to put back into the community or money to put back into its people, which is what we all kind of want and the institutions we work for. So you have to really think about how that project is going to work for whatever the goals are for your institution, and how, with being flexible, okay, this one item will work. And that shows that you're fiscally responsible and that you're looking for options B, C, and D so you can get all of your initiatives done well in your budget, or, show how those initiatives would be beneficial to fund to your institution.
Do you have any examples where you had to be flexible?
So most recently, and so this wasn't a grassroots thing. This was for my institution, so it isn't for the public. But one example is that I am currently growing our digitization abilities here at UT Southwestern, and I wanted top of the line scanner that could scan posters. It could do all kinds of things. Now this scanner costs, about $150,000. And I wasn't going to get that scanner, but I came up with 3 scanners the next day when I was told, okay, this probably isn't going to happen. The next day that would work, that I could get all of my projects done except maybe 1 or 2, which was which were minor projects, that was, maybe a third of the cost. These scanners were probably a third of the cost of the other one. And one of them was funded because I had found one that was within our budget and that would do everything but one project, which was really just like digitizing posters. And for us, our particular collection only has maybe 20 posters. So you also have to look at that when you're looking at your collections. What's a priority? Would I have loved to have this big scanner that could do large poster size? Absolutely. It would have made doing other things very easy. But, was 10 posters worth an extra $100,000? No, because I could send those out much cheaper to be digitized. So you have to look at all those other options. And that happens to be probably my most recent example of being able to be flexible and finding different options that will work for you and work for the institution.
If I understand correctly, you started off with the scanner that could do everything, and then you got the feedback that, did they give you a budget or some cap, or you just knew that it had to be less?
I knew it had to be less. So I had found everything. And then the next, I had a meeting with my supervisor, and I had already sent her the quotes. So my vendor had gotten back to me quite quickly. He had gotten back to me the same day with new quotes for these other scanners. And she had told me, she's like, well, if it could be under 50,000. And it actually worked out great because the next one down, that was the next best option, was 48,000.
Oh, very close.
Yes, it was very close, but for our institution, I think over 50, you have to apply for capital funds generally. So it worked out really well that happened to be in our budget at the time. And we could then just proceed to purchase after we went through all of the other, red tape to purchase something. I think a big thing is to know going in when you are requesting funding for anything that you might be requesting too much. I always go with shoot for the moon and then, maybe accept some stars. So, I shot for the moon. I wanted this $150,000 scanner. I was told no by not my supervisor, by my supervisor's supervisor. So it went up. It went up the chain and I was told no. So then I had to pick something else. And then I was told yes. So being flexible and having other options ready is very important when you're doing anything, whether it's you're digitizing, you're working with communities. You have to have at least a option B, if not a C and D. Be ready to pivot.
To pivot. That's a great way to describe it.
Mm-hmm.
Did you mention having to look into applying for funding as well to get financial support for the scanner purchase?
I have not had to do that for this one because we happen to have it in our budget. I am currently, which I haven't mentioned, but I've mentioned to you in our previous conversation, Sandy, I am currently applying for funding to send items out to be digitized for our AV materials that we do not have the capability to digitize. And so that is a very important thing. You need to look for funding. If you're not approved for A, B, C, or D in your plan, we'll look for funding. Funding is out there. It's not easy to get, but sometimes it can be if there are grants that are very specific or grants that might not get a lot of attention. Sometimes that's brought up to me. My supervisor will send me something and she'll be like, oh, I'm on this committee and not very many people have applied for this funding. Do you have any projects? And so those are the types of opportunities that you really want to take hold of, is to apply for funding to get your projects done, to get your equipment purchased. Even if you're like, I've never done this, I've never written a grant before, you have to start, write one, and then you can write another, and eventually it does get easier.
Yeah, that's a great example of real life application of being flexible. Did you have any other examples or stories that come to mind?
For public scanning events, just being flexible on times, locations. When you're dealing with the public, things can change quite quickly. As much as someone might not want to cancel last minute, they might. So you want to make sure that you are as available as possible within that day. Obviously, you can't make yourself available to come and do, any time in the week if it needs to be rescheduled. But like within that day, if it needs to start later, or maybe, if it needs to start earlier, they give you enough time. But also, I think one thing is don't be afraid to say no. When you're working with the public, especially, don't be afraid to say no. We have this mindset of, the customer is always right. But in our field, that is not the case. It's really not. The customer, the patrons don't know, what goes into digitizing items, what goes into preserving items. So if you're doing a public event and they want to start 3 hours earlier, and that means you would have to leave your institution at 5 a.m., don't be afraid to tell them, no, that's not going to work. I don't, whether you don't get paid overtime or, you're an hourly person, I can't do that. Or if you're at an event and someone brings 50 items for you to scan, tell them, no, I can do 10. If you want to come back later, I can, do another 10 or something. It might get a little backlash. It might be a little uncomfortable. I know archivists and librarians, most of us are a little introverted, so we don't really like conflict, but you have to be able to say no, and you have to be able to stand up for yourself. And that's kind of an edge of being flexible. You can be flexible up to a point.
How do you decide when to be firm and when to be flexible?
I think it's just depends on the situation. All of that it's so situational based. If I can be flexible, I generally try to be. For example, even just like in a personal thing, say we have a meeting and something comes up and you have to change it to an hour later. Okay. If I don't have a meeting for my work, that's fine. That's not a problem. But if it's an event that you've been planning for, 3 months, and they want to change the start time by an hour, and they give you a couple of days ahead of time notice, you can be flexible. If they want to change it by an hour and they tell you the day of, or the end of the day before, then you have to say no. It's planned for this. We can't accommodate that. I'm sorry, but no. Even if they told you, like, I try to be flexible even up to the point of if they're like, oh, can we start an hour or two early, and they tell me, like, they sent me an email the night before, or I find out right away in the morning, then I can see if I can accommodate that because of reasons X, Y, and Z. But if I can't, it's just nope, no, I'm sorry, can't accommodate that. And most people at one point in their life were some form of professionals, whether they worked even in a factory, they had to clock in and out, or they were in a school, or even just CEO of a company. Everyone at some point was a professional, and they know schedules, and they realize that changes can't always be accommodated, or they should. You hope people realize that, but sometimes working with the public can be quite frustrating. Don't be bend over backwards, make yourself feel uncomfortable trying to accommodate a request. If you're feeling uncomfortable with accommodating this request, then you need to say no, because that's not good for you. You have to really kind of focus on, can I do this? Is it okay if I do this? And if you can, then yeah, completely be flexible. But if you can't, or if there's any reason why you can't, then don't be afraid to tell people no.
So, Angie, you've supervised public scanning events, traveling digitization labs, and full special collection renovations, all while responsibly containing expenses. What nuggets of wisdom can you share on budget friendly preservation, sustaining cultural memory?
Look at multiple options. And so we spoke earlier about, options A, B, C, D. And not just in this case, it's not just options for different items, but different places to purchase items. So when you're looking at preservation material, whether that's an acid-free box or acid-free folders, items that preserve the physical side, items to preserve the digital side. We always, as archivists, we go towards Hollinger Metal Edge, or we go towards Gaylord archival websites, and those are kind of where they kind of live and die. But there's so many different options out there. Not only are those two, they're fabulous sites. Gaylord especially has been starting for smaller grassroots communities. They have a section on their website where people can look at different items. So if you don't know what you want to get, but you know what project you want, that's a really great place to start, is to look at their family history section and see what objects they recommend. And then you can kind of go and look for items yourself. So depending on your budget, maybe you can get them from Gaylord. Amazon has some really good options, but a lot of places, one place that people really don't think about are craft stores. Hobby Lobby or Michael's, their photograph boxes and such are acid and lignin free. And so those are areas that you can look at. You could look at Walmart, you could look at these big box stores for items if you know what you're looking for. So the big thing is to know, what are the keywords that you're looking for. And those are generally, if an item is acid or lignin free, or you're looking for a specific type of scanner that it needs to do up to 600 DPI. Those are things that you can find on a budget, but if you know the keywords. And so my biggest suggestion is always just to, if you don't know what to look for, look at Hollinger, look at Gaylord, see what the items look like, see what they call them, what their descriptions are, write yourself some notes, and then see if one of the big box stores has them, one of the craft stores has something similar, something that one of the places that maybe your institution contracts with where you can purchase from, that they have something similar. That will help you really preserve your budget. But it also shows that you're willing to think out of the box. And, that could eventually be beneficial down the line to get a higher budget for any projects that you want to do.
How might our expectations shift if community preservation was collectively resourced on par with other infrastructure?
So I really liked this question, mostly because as someone who's worked in several different sectors of archives, I was in state and city government. I've been in university, in academia. I was at a public library. You see how the preservation of history is treated in multiple different ways. If it was funded the way other types of infrastructure was, such as even just buildings, updating a building, or getting new IT equipment because, your computer is 3 years old and now it's in your contract that you get a new one or something. The expectation that you would have a large archive or that you would work with your community to preserve items would be automatic. it wouldn't be a shock that, you're reaching out to a student group or you're reaching out to a community center to get their archive. It would be an expectation that, you need to do this because you're being funded, but it would also show the people that hold the money understand the importance of what archives do, of the preservation of what memory institutions are. That would be an amazing shift if we had resources on par with other infrastructure and other infrastructure plans, but we would be expected to do more and to have more staff. And I don't want to speak for all archivists, but most archivists that I speak to want to do more, but we can't because of oversight from administration or financial restraints.
Do any examples come to mind where there has been some supportive infrastructure for community preservation at an institution that you've worked at?
At one of my institutions, they had started an oral history project with the African American community, and it was our African American archive with the public library. And so there was a lot of support around getting them the equipment they needed and the staff they needed to be able to do interviews, whether in person or over Zoom, because of the cultural climate at the time. So this was during and shortly after the protests in 2020 and the death of George Floyd and all social upheavals. So that was highly supported. But the problem with support that comes with a social climate or a political climate is that the support wanes. And so while the project is still going on, it's still going strong, they have not been able to update the equipment. They don't have the funding to get more people so that they can expand. So they are, you work within the constraints of where you started versus having been able to grow throughout the years.
What innovations make you hopeful that technology can help level the playing field if priorities align to uplift everywhere equally?
As a digital archivist, I'm really I look at different technologies used in archives. And I think for me, it's not only the ease of use in technology for that innovation, but also how good an iPhone is or an iPad or some other type of phone or tablet now that could really help with grassroots efforts, such as, if someone has a new iPad Air, taking photographs of, instead of a scan of a photo, could be just as high quality as taking a 300 DPI scan of a photograph, right? Technology and the cost of good technology coming down can really help smaller archives, smaller efforts in making a larger impact because they can do more with less. So they can do more with the phone that they already have or the tablet they already have. The cost of cloud storage is going down. They can add more to cloud storage at that point so they don't have to hold it on their personal phone. Or just these types of innovations are really going to continue to assist the smaller institutions, the ones who have very limited budgets, or these grassroots efforts that are coming about to preserve because of events, because of the bombing in Paris, or the when they sat in on Wall Street, or the umbrella movement in Hong Kong, all that ephemeral material. Even being able to just take photographs of it, high quality photographs of the items, and still preserve that, even if a grassroots effort cannot preserve the signs or any other ephemeral materials, that still preserves the event. And being able to store it and make it available online in different types of formats really will help kind of showcase archives in a very different light. It's not just a place for like dusty books or dusty documents or something. That's what you hear a lot. I think technology is really helping with that. Another example, we started doing an oral history project, and I don't have a video camera, but we had just purchased an iPad Air. That's what we recorded oral histories on, was our iPad Air. And then, we had gotten $25 Bluetooth lapel mics that worked great, and a $20 ring light. So, you can do a lot on a budget. Because we had the iPad, it was okay, great. We didn't need to get this big video camera or something, this really professional setup, because this worked just fine.
In your opinion, should regional group formally synchronize efforts or let organic need drive collaborations?
As someone who works within institutions, I can't really speak to it. I can definitely give you like my thoughts, but I do want to state right away that like I realize I work within a set institution, so I don't really work with a lot of formal grassroots groups, and that's what I'm assuming when you say regional groups. It's like a grassroots effort versus like the Society of Southwest Archivists. I think you should let organic need drive collaborations. Obviously, in my opinion, if there are multiple groups within the same city or within the same close cities that are doing the same thing, and their communities are kind of cross sector communities, reaching out and working with each other will really help with the preservation. Because if your communities are basically the same and you might be talking to the same people, then your community is going to start wondering, well, why am I talking to this one and not this one? Or like, why don't I already talk to this one? I don't need to talk to you. Right. But if you are the first, instead of trying to find other grassroots that don't do the same thing that you do, I think just letting organic need, I think you should drive that collaboration. But don't be afraid to go and talk to the other grassroots groups. Don't be afraid to talk to other groups that maybe aren't doing anything like this, but really fall under what you want to do, what you're preserving. It might be a church group or it might be another community group, but talking to them. So I think don't limit yourself to other archive or memory-based groups to work with.
I hear a theme here of thinking outside the box, being adaptable to approach with the organic need of the group, but then also maybe synchronizing efforts if there's opportunities, even with groups that are not archives oriented, but they may have an interest in that community as well.
Correct. Yeah.
What wisdom now reminds you no sincere effort toward community memory, however small, is ever fully in vain?
Every now and then you get moments where it's like, oh, really? Kind of back to that, the African American Archive and the Oral History Project, as I was making those available online and assisting with that project, one of my former professors, Dr. Bob Ryder at Alabama, he reached out to me and he told me that he was actually using this project as an example in his class and talking about it. That one kind of got to me because he didn't know I was working at the library at the time. He didn't know that was a project that I was on. So the fact that like, okay, this has a little bit of a further reach than just preserving our community here. Other people are seeing this. Other people are using this, whether they're using it to learn, they're using it like to learn from what happened at the event, or to learn how to preserve communities and preserve community voices. It is definitely, it's making a little bit of an impact. It might not look like you have an impact at all for a long time, but every now and then you'll get someone that's like, oh yeah, you did this, or this is something that I was hoping someone would do. And that's one of those moments where it's like, okay, so I did this for a reason. This is the reason that I did this. Because sometimes, when you work in institutions, when you work with government, when you work in academia, sometimes it can be very, very downtrodden, and I'm sure it's at other places as well, with budget cuts and, oh, we have to cut staff, or we can't hire more staff, or I'm sorry, we can't do this, we can't do that. And so, when you can do something and it's one of those things that's like, oh, okay, so I was able to do this, but it had no impact. And then to find out that it did, those are one of those, okay, well, maybe I will continue to do projects like this, or, oh, that did this, maybe I'll revamp it in some other way. At all institutions, we're told no more often than yes. So to know that something you did assisted some community in some way, in a positive way, really is like, okay, well, I can do that. I could do that project again, or I could do something similar with maybe a different section, a different community, and hope that it will have a similar or a different impact. You should always build on what you know, what you've done. Projects that have been a success when you start a new position, as you continue in a position. We always say, don't reinvent the wheel. And this is the same concept. Don't reinvent the wheel. Always try to do something that you've done. I do social media for my archive right now, and that's because I did social media for my archive when I was in North Dakota. And so that's something, and I've built on what I do here has been based on what I did there. It's not, the same formula because we have a different audience, but you should always build on what what was a success, learn from what wasn't, learn how it wasn't, maybe build on that to make it a success. Don't reinvent that wheel. There are resources out there, whether it's yourself or your colleagues, to be able to learn more.
In balancing digitization with care, you embody what's possible in times with more compassion over hurry, community over self. Reflect on how you model uplifting overlooked history so future archivists and other memory stewards follow your lead. For example, could you walk through a time you instilled empathy-led practices within a team facing backlogs?
Sure. So, in fact, my team right now is facing tremendous backlog for the size of our institution. As a manager, you have to think about how you would feel with that amount of backlog, that amount of work. And, I personally have a lot of backlog as the digital archivist as well, but setting clear expectations, but achievable expectations. And working through things that are, I don't tell my team, I want half the backlog completed by, the end of the year, because that's so ambiguous. Well, what do you consider, what half of the backlog? Is it 10 tiny collections, or is it all these really big collections? So I work with my team in setting expectations on collection basis that are in the backlog. So my team is currently working on one of our very large collections in our backlog. But you also have to realize that that's not their only job. Archivists aren't just, you might be a processing archivist, but that's probably not all you're doing. So you have to have the expectation of this is what it is, you want this done, but they're also doing XYZ. What's really important is keeping in touch with your staff, seeing not only how the project is going, how the milestones, but how they think it's going. Do they need more time on it? Are they overwhelmed doing that project and this one and this next one? Like, do we need to cut something out and maybe wait on doing that? So I think just being open to that and not saying, oh, this has to be done now. This has to be done. Unless it absolutely has to be done, don't throw that around very often at all.
Despite straining bandwidths, what concepts now excite you most, keeping history's hope alive through emerging minds, equitably sharing, creativity, and truth? How specifically could fresh voices carry solutions forward through innovation networks you mentor?
So for me, that one was one of those things that I went back to kind of a digital archivist standpoint, because that's really my mindset most of the time. And one of the things that's kind of made me really excited in recent years is VR and augmented reality, incorporating that within the archive or within your community. There was a project that Trinity College did in Dublin for the 2016 Easter Rising. So the 100-year anniversary of the Easter Rising from 1916. And it was done so beautifully. It was done with Google Maps, and it showed you where you were on Google Maps, and then you could click on a photograph of what that building looked like, during the in 1916, and it was narrated as it went, because you could click on stories from people who were there. It was one of those concepts that really brought archives and something people know, like Google Maps, together so seamlessly that people could easily be like, oh, this old photograph, and then really get sucked into going through Dublin and looking at all of the pictures and learning more about it. I've also seen something similar with augmented reality on like a phone, going through a city and being able to click on an image within the map of an old building. Same with, I think there's a site called like History Pin that does something similar. I think, VR has some really great capabilities that I don't know that archives are really taking advantage of quite yet. I think the biggest problem between being able to do these types of really innovative digital archiving and not being able to do it is really just having an archivist who knows how to code and do all these different things. We all know a little bit, but it really takes someone who can build it. So having a team that's dedicated to the archive, or even just having a person that's dedicated to the archive to help build these innovative applications, would really pull things forward and really apply for, have some fresh points of view and get people excited about preserving history, get not just our generation, older generations excited, but get more younger generations excited about it as well.
Just bringing to life history.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. Having both reward and fatigue in this field, what gentle reminder might encourage someone in library and information science overcome with an effort they wish they could give more to?
Just remind yourself at the end of the day, it is a job. It is, even if you are working for like a nonprofit, and that's a lot of times what a lot of the grassroots start are at nonprofits. It's still a job. It might be your calling, but it's not your life. So if you are really down because something isn't working or it hasn't, or you haven't gotten that funding that you need, that you absolutely needed or something, I think taking a step away, breathing and just being like, okay, it's not the end of the world. I might not be able to do it now. Maybe I can do it at some other time. But also, when something comes through, make sure to take time to be like, hey, I did this, this was me. Take that credit. Take the credit for, this project, or take the credit for what you do. One of my colleagues that I manage, I encourage her to take the credit for the exhibits. We do physical exhibits, and she writes all of the cards and does all the research. And so, I know I get asked, how did you do it? And I make sure to tell them I didn't do that. That wasn't me. That was her. So make sure to not just be like, oh, it's fine. I think as women, and as professional women, especially, we're told not to take the credit, or not to kind of toot our own horns or anything, because it's bragging or it's crass or whatever, but it's not. So that's, I think, when you are running into that in the field, take the credit for your accomplishments, celebrate those accomplishments, celebrate the project, celebrate the grant that you got, and also, make sure to take some time for yourself when you are just overwhelmed and tired by what you're doing, knowing that what you're doing is good, but maybe you need to take a little break, take a night off or take a day off or something, and then come back with a fresh mind.
It's easy to get trapped into vocational awe and lose yourself in the work that you're doing, thinking that, oh, I got to do it. No one else is going to do it. It's got to be me. And
Hmm.
and forgetting that there's resources, there's people, there's time, and that at the end of the day, there is a need to have work-life harmony and balance.
And I've been there. When I was early in my career, it was definitely one of those like, oh, I need to be here because, this is important or something. And then you just realize how unimportant you being there is. I remember specifically one time I could have gotten like a really significant voucher to come back from a trip a day later. But I was like, oh no, I have to, or no, it was later that day, but I would have had to take another day off work because I would have gotten in at like 5. And I was like, oh no, I have to be there because we have this event the next day. And I didn't. I was not important to that event. There was no reason for me to be there. It's just, so you just realizing like, okay, things will happen whether you're there or not. So take that time for yourself. Take that time. If it's really important, it can wait. It'll wait for you. If it absolutely cannot wait, that though. You won't take that time if there's something that cannot wait, because you know that it needs to be done. So say you have a meeting with your supervisor, like, no, don't take a day that day. Like, you have to be there. Um, so there are things that can wait and things that can't, but also just realize that you don't have to be there. You don't, sometimes you being there does not have any way on the project at all.
Okay, so hope for the future. Based on current trends and your experiences, what gives you hope about the future of community archiving, especially in the context of limited resources?
I think one of the things that gives me hope is programs like the one that you're a part of, Sandy, for that focus on social justice in archives, into having, getting you your degree, not just a certificate, but an MLIS. That gives me hope, because I think when I was in school, community archives have always been a thing, but they've always been ephemeral, right? Like I spoke about the protests, like the umbrella movement, or the memorials that had to do with the Paris bombings, and all of that is really, they're community based, but they're really just ephemeral materials. And that's the same with a lot of protests, a lot of other social justice movements, is that they weren't archived until much later. The civil rights movement was not archived until much later. There wasn't someone, there were very few people that were there getting everything down. We've got photographs. We have a lot, but that had more to do with the media than regular people. So I really think that this new turn of archives, of focusing on things that are current, preserving current thing versus preserving specifically items that are what we would consider old, quote unquote. I'm excited about what the new trends are going to be, the new students, what you all are now learning in archives. My colleague graduated a couple years ago from archive school, and we have different vocabulary for the same thing. So we're learning from each other. So I'm excited to see kind of where that continues to go.
Yeah, that's a great example. I can personally say that the program I'm in, Training for Community Embedded Social Justice Archivist, aka Archival Studies Social Justice Master's Scholarship Program, is a mouthful, but it is just has changed my world, turned it upside down. It's just given me so many opportunities to meet great leaders and passionate people in the field, such as yourself. Even though I was working in archives for a few years, just being in this program has just given me a great education and great opportunities to connect. And also just people in my cohort, just seeing their passion and their creativity in working with limitations of support or of, just their own personal challenges is just all it's just that group effort and that group collaboration and just group learning is just being in community itself is very encouraging.
Absolutely, absolutely. And I always I learned so much when I was in archive school from my cohort, from the people I went to class with. We all had different points of view. We all focused on different things. I've always been focused on cultural memory and oral histories. That has been a research focus of mine for years, even before I went to archive school. So learning from them and learning how they would do something, and they'll continue to be a resource for you throughout your career. I talk to mine all the time. I have questions. I know there's ones that I can ask. I know what they're doing in their projects. So it's just having that type of community as well, as you all grow and go out and find, new jobs, grow in your current position, however that may work for you. It'll continue that way as you all continue to learn.
As a leader in the field, what key piece of advice would you offer to up-and-coming archivists who face challenges of resource scarcity and workload management?
Okay. So I'll start with the workload management. You can only do as much as you have time for. So when I look at my workload, I currently probably have like 5 or 6 projects that I'm working on. I work with what is the most important one first. Always do the one that needs to be done first, maybe has the most steps, such as you write it, then someone else needs to review it, then you redo it, then it needs to go into a review again. I do all of those ones first because that takes the most time. Now, I'm currently working on my projects. They don't really have a time frame. So sometimes when you are trying to get your workload down and you do have all these ones that aren't like super time sensitive, sometimes getting the easiest one done first really feels like like a little win. Like, hey, I did this. This is done. I can check it. So, maybe you have a small collection you can work on and get that done. And then it's like, oh, this one, I did this collection. This is done now. Now I can work on this larger one that will take me more time. You have to look at what you have and look at how you can kind of divvy out your time. It may work out where you can work on both collections at the same time. Sometimes that works, but sometimes you also want to focus on one and get one done, and that's individual based. I'm kind of a hybrid. Sometimes I'll focus on one, sometimes I'll do 4 or 5 projects in one day, depending on what I have for that day. And advice for challenges of resource scarcity, that is always going to be a challenge. I don't know anyone that doesn't have that challenge. Maybe corporate archivists. None of my friends made it into the corporate world, so I don't really know. But we all have to deal with that. We all have to deal with not having enough funding, not having enough resources to get all of our work done. My advice on that is to accept it and work with it. Work with the funding that you have. We spoke earlier about finding different options for the same type of materials. Maybe you can find cheaper options. Work with your administration. See what they have. They might have funding that hasn't been earmarked for anyone. See if you can get that funding. They might be able to point you in the direction of grants, or maybe they know, okay, hey, we've got capital, the university has capital funds somewhere, or the government, look, we've got capital funds, you can apply for that to do this big project or something. So don't take it all on yourself. Don't worry about not having the budget to do something yourself. Talk with people, talk with your supervisor, talk with your administrators, and see what they can do to help you. See how they could do it, how they could help with that project. I recently digitized a bunch of DVDs in one collection that is now it's most of the collection's born digital. So these were much older ones. I wrote a metadata sheet, but I didn't have to write the description because they had already been cataloged. So by digitizing them and making them, put them in a digital format, and then creating this metadata sheet where I kind of just copied and pasted everything. That's an example of a small project that was an easy win for me, because it took me maybe a couple of days to digitize the tapes, and then a couple other days to do this because I didn't work on them all day. Then within maybe 2 weeks or something, I had this collection completed, and now it's done. And eventually when I'm ready, I'll upload it and make it available to the public. But until that time, it's a done collection. Those are little wins for the archive. So if you have small collections like that maybe you just need a win. Maybe that's if you are demoralized or on the verge of burnout and you just need a win, find a small collection that you can work on. Find something that's easy to work on and see about getting that done, whether it's metadata or organizing your server so you're going through a bunch of photographs. Sometimes you need an easy win to kind of keep you going. So always kind of have those in your back pocket.
Yeah, I definitely find it helpful to take a break and pivot from one project to another one, especially if I've hit a wall, and trying to problem solve it. In closing, as the next generation prepares to take on leadership roles in community archiving, what crucial experiences or mindsets do you believe are essential for them to develop, especially in resource-constrained environments?
So I think, I guess to summarize what I've been saying, right, is just it's essential to develop a sense of flexibility, but also a sense of your importance and your time as the leader to realize what can be done, what can't be done in a time frame or within your budget. Resource constraints will always be there. That's just something that's the theme of being an adult professional. Is having to deal with that, realizing like, okay, I might not get this done. I might not have funding for this project, but maybe I have funding for this smaller project right now, and I'll hold off on this bigger one. So making sure that you have options. So that goes back to that flexibility mindset. Have multiple options. Be willing to pivot when your first option does not come through, as well as, being aware of your own constraints and your own, don't hit that wall. Don't burn out. That's, no one wants that. So especially, when you're in a place that doesn't have a ton of money, you try to do everything because you can't hire someone or something. Just realize that you can't do everything. You're not a super person. You can't do 5,000 things at once. So be kind to yourself and realize that you can only do so much, and what you do is worth it. And that's all, whatever you get done is fine.
Thank you so much for joining us today. We'll be sharing Angie's contact information in the show notes for anyone who would like to connect with her.
This was an episode of Archives and Communities, the official podcast of the SAA student chapter at the University of Alabama. Music by ScanGlobe and Scott Holmes. Opinions expressed in this podcast are not reflective of any particular institution. Thank you for listening, and join us again next time.